Hi, and welcome back to Rediscovering RC. My personal journey as I venture back into the world of RC and RC racing after an almost 20-year hiatus. I'm your host Julio, and it's been about 6 months now since I started doing all of the research, purchasing the products that I decided on, building some of the products, and really just getting myself ready to get back into it. And I thought today it would be fun to kind of like take a look at some of the biggest realizations that I've made and how far the hobby has come in the 20 years that I've been away. So with that said, let's get at it. Alright, so this list isn't in any particular order, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention this as number one, and that is technology, technology, technology. Gone are the days of having to hunt down your clothespin to get onto the driver's stand. Gone are the days of crystals altogether. 2.4 gigahertz technology has really come a long way. I mean, back when I last raced, the technology was just starting to come out where you had basically crystalless transmitters and receiver modules. Basically, it had a digital channel selector where you would choose the frequency that you were on because you still had to run on a specific frequency. And of course, you had the corresponding receiver. Now, that still led to limitations. You had to resolve channel conflicts and whatnot. Today, with 2.4 gigahertz technology, that's all out the windows because all the radios can basically, you bind to a specific receiver, and in theory, you can run as many cars as you want on the track. Of course, there's limitations as to how many cars you can get on a track, but it's nice to know that that's one major convenience with the technology today. The other, big thing in technology as well is transponders. Now with the advent of personal transponders, there isn't this big shuffle and looking for a transponder if one gets lost. Everybody has their own transponder. It allows everybody to get on and off the track a lot faster, get the cars through tech faster. So another major convenience thanks to technology. So that's number one. Let's go on to number two. Alrighty, so number two on my list of the things that I've noticed that have changed from then to now is that chassis flex is a thing now. Back when I raced primarily, which was on-road pan cars, a lot of the cars when they first came out in the early 90s were made out of this material. Now this is commonly known as fiberglass and known in the industry as G10. Now one of the things about this is that especially as chassis material, this tended to flex a lot. And one of the challenges in designing the chassis is that you really couldn't get a handle on the suspension setup because of the flex that was inherent into this material. So that kind of led to the transition to graphite, which is a much stiffer material, and allowed the suspension to actually do the work while minimizing the flex by the chassis. Now granted, graphite still flexes if subjected to enough forces, but it was a stiffer material, and the whole idea was that we wanted to get the suspension to work and not throw in that uncertainty of the chassis flex. Today, with the advances in really engineering, the approaches to engineering, especially on the structural side, they're really integrating the chassis flex into the design of the vehicles and designing parts specifically to kind of like control how much flex the chassis has. Just in the case of the TLR22, the side rails on the main chassis, you can change those from the stiff as L part to a soft part, all in an effort to control how much of that lateral flex the chassis does. And then again, that's something that you can control to really nail down your handling. So that's a huge advancement, and I'm really happy to see all these advances, especially in the engineering side, today, and it's really has pushed the hobby to its limits. So that's number two. Let's go on to number three. Okay, so number three on the list has to be the use of exotic materials today compared to back then. Getting back on the subject of graphite, one of the big things that you had to be careful with when working with graphite components back then is that even though there were practices like CNC, going on back then, let's just say that the quality of workmanship wasn't as great as it is today, for lack of a better word. It was some great machining work. However, the edges left something to be desired compared to today. If you weren't careful, one of the first things that we had to do was basically run a line of CA along the edges, because if you didn't and you didn't take care of your equipment, over time those edges would fray and it would just leave the separation of layers in the chassis. So the chassis was the most expensive component that you could buy in the car, and obviously you had to take care of that. And really the CA kind of kept those laminations sealed so that wouldn't happen over time. Today, just as an example, this is the rear shock tower from a 22 5.0 DC Elite. And the attention to detail in a machine part like this is fantastic compared to years ago. First off, these edges are chamfered, and there must be some other process that they're doing along these edges to make them feel so smooth and truly finished. I have the highest confidence that over time this part isn't going to split apart like the chassis of yesterday did. So In addition to that, I mean, you've got little reliefs here, which is where the button head screws would rest after you screw them into the rear, bulkhead. And again, it's just attention to detail, high quality part, and this is just another great advantage to the RC hobby today compared to yesteryear. So, in addition to that, just the materials in general. Back when I was running, I mean, people were just starting to experiment a lot with composite materials. We all started with nylon, then came the fiberglass filled nylon. They were just starting to get into like carbon filled composite materials. And this was around the time also that Team Losi was starting to really work and design their Stifazell. Stifazell has been around a long time, and I know for a fact that they've probably just been advancing that over the years. And Stifazell is really one of the best plastics that I honestly have experienced in the hobby so far. So again, I mean, just great advances. I guess you could lump that in with technology, but again, a lot of it has to do with engineering. So that's number 3. Let's move on to number 4. All right, so number 4 on the list really has to do with tires that are being used today, particularly in off-road. I mean, it's become a much more specialized and technical, discipline now. Back, not that I did much off-road racing back then, but the little bit that I did, I mean, you kind of usually just ran some knobbies in the rear, some rib tires in the front, and really we were all running outdoor, kind of like the Georgia clay type surfaces. These were fine for those surfaces, but over time, as the variety of surfaces expanded, you had the advent that started, over time, indoor racing as well, on a different kind of clay, more like an earth clay as opposed to that Georgia clay. Tire companies really accelerated their efforts to get not only different compounds, but different, just the patterns, everything. Really, a lot of engineering work went into that. I mean, the stories are legendary of Brian Kidwald, all the things that he did playing around with pin heights and turning tires inside out. And eventually the industry, took that to heart and started designing that into the different patterns that they started releasing over time. I mean, aside from the tires and tire compounds themselves, you have the foams. Back when I ran, we didn't even use foams. You kind of sealed up the tires, and the air that got stuck in there, that was kind of like gave the tire pneumatic property. Now with foams, you kind of adjust how much the tires are going to sink in and respond to the surface when you exert all those forces on it. So again, I mean, that's a huge part of the industry. I could say the same on road. On road back then, we just used foam, and when I started, it was really more of a synthetic foam as opposed to some of the rubber compounds that were just starting to come in. A little bit more expensive, but again, it was worth it when you had actual rubber in the foam to get more grip on the track. Today, a lot of that is still being done today. You've got a lot more variety of different compounds and hardness of compounds in the foam tires, which are really only being used in nitro on road these days. But again, it's just more advancement of engineering in the hobby, and that's a great thing for all of us. So that's number 4. Let's get on to number 5. Alrighty, number 5, and certainly not least on the list, is kind of a sadder point that I've noticed since coming back to the hobby compared to years ago. And that's really, the hobby has adopted more of a corporate culture now, in the sense that you really don't have those grassroots companies around anymore. Sure, you still have your team associated, you still have your TLR, but you got to keep in mind that these started as independent companies, and now they're really corporate owned. It's really going to make it hard for the small company today to compete with these companies that have corporate backing behind them. I mean, I don't think you're going to see another company, rise from the grassroots level to compete, with a chassis that can go against a team associated or a TLR or a Yokomo for that matter. It's really a sad thing. Everything is going online. You've got, the Amazons of the world that are kind of taking over everything. So it's kind of a sadder aspect of the hobby, but I really hope that, over time things can get better in that sense. I mean, I'm sure it's one of the reasons why Novak had to close their doors after so many years, and most likely they just couldn't compete with the hobby wings of the world. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised that Tiken has been able to, last as long as they have. I know they got bought out some years ago and taken over, but even then, as a small company, it must be difficult for them to, compete with these big corporate companies. Personally, I think it's a great product. Not that I'm sponsored by them or anything. It was really just a product of my own research and really my satisfaction with the product since I purchased them. So I really hope that Tiken is able to continue going on and doing what they do while competing with those big companies. All right, so those are my 5 top things that I think have really, been a huge difference between then and now as it relates to the hobby. I know I didn't get into the topic of batteries. I mean, that could be the subject for a whole other video in terms of the advances in battery technology. But what do you think? please go ahead and like, comment, favorite, and subscribe. Any and all feedback will be helpful for me to give you the content that you want to see. So I look forward to hearing your feedback, and until next time, I'm your host Julio. We'll see you next time. Take care.